years, we have been working with international companies and the shared services and the BPOs. We've been working for those companies as employees, helping them set up automation programs and continuous improvement programs. And for the last 2 years, we have been working with international companies and their shared services, helping them to do the same. And this is why today we will be running this session.
And Andrzej, let me interrupt you for 1 second. There are 10 people in the session listening, and let me encourage each of you, please, to put yourself, accept the audio video, and we'll have you on the screen. It's more useful for Andrzej and everyone to see who else is listening. So please show yourself, so to speak. Andrzej, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. And before I will invite you to share your thoughts on the automation, what I would like to tell is a short story about a shared service that we are working with. And this is a shared service of a company that produces and sells sports equipment and sports clothing. They have a well-established shared service. And I met them a few years back when they were sharing the story about how they got into process automation. But it was at the time when everybody was already talking robotics and everybody wanted to hear about robotics and how do we do that, how do we start, how do we make the pilots. At that time, they were very advanced at process automation, but not with robotic process automation tools. They have been working with a vendor that was helping them to do those automations with Microsoft tools in general. So not only VBA, but also .NET applications, Azure Access applications, you name it, right? And they've been very successful with it. They were able to build robust, stable automations that would be running on the virtual machines in unattended mode. So something that usually, at this point in time, usually when we think about this sort of solutions, we're thinking robotic process automation. And about 2 years ago, and by the way, they have been automating the things that are within their shared service. Right? So, and basically mostly finance, because in their shared service, they have mostly finance and IT. So they've been doing it for finance. And this is something that was kind of a groundwork for what they decided to do as the next step. As about 2 years ago, they have decided to kind of build another layer when it comes to process automation, to introduce robotic process automation into their shared service, but not only to automate the processes that they have in the shared service itself, but to also expand and to offer process automation to their group, to other group companies, right? Basically to their whole group. And this is something that they have been very, very successful with. They started in a bit non-typical way, because they started with IT processes, IT service center processes, which is something a lot of companies do not really consider as potentials for process automation, and they prove to be really good. Stuff like spam reporting and ticket dispatching and access rights. This is something that gets automated really well. But when they went out to the rest of the company, they found really interesting cases for marketing, for example. Their marketing has bots built that, for instance, check on multiple e-commerce sites, where are my products? If I search for something from the top 10 results, how many of them are our products, right? This is something that takes a lot of time. They have to do it very often, and this information helps them a lot to deal with those e-commerce sites and to plan how they do their marketing. They did quite a lot when it comes to automating sales, and they went into procurement and basically reporting. And all of those things have been done as a service to the group companies. And they have become a center of excellence for process automation for the group. And one of the latest things, and this kind of connects to the session that team just had, is they have decided to go for, because they are in the process of introducing SAP S/4HANA, they have decided to do the testing with RPA. Right? So before that, there was a bot built for another application that have been introducing, Ariba, which is a procurement application. And this automation is running every week after they introduce the changes in the system. It tests the scenarios and it lets them know whether they broke something with the update or not. And now the same thing will be built for transactions in S/4HANA. So basically, what started as a way of automating things within the shared service, as a way of reducing cost, as a way to make what they were tasked to do, to make it better and faster and more reliable and cheaper, has become a service that they offer to the group company, and they have been very successful with it. And why I'm telling you this story is that a lot of companies start with process automation, whatever tools they are using. There's a lot of different tools, and you need to choose the ones that fit your company the best. They start doing that. They start doing the pilots. Usually, the pilots are a success, and then at a certain point, they encounter a wall. They are in a position that, you know, there's no more low-hanging fruit inside the shared service, because this is where it usually starts. We have encountered a lot of companies that at a certain point they just stopped. And actually, not long ago, we have been talking to one company that actually has rolled back because they couldn't find new cases for automation within a shared service. And so the maintenance and the fees for the software just were too big to just say, yeah, whatever we have automated, we'll keep it. And this is why I wanted to ask you, how do you see this journey for your shared service? Because I've been working for multiple shared services, and I know that when you are a shared service, first, when you found a shared service, when you set it up, you're working really hard to stabilize everything that you have taken over. Your main job is to show that you can do the same things as well as the group companies that you have taken over the work, right? Then what you're trying to do is to improve, to basically show everyone that you can do it better, you can do it more efficiently. And then you get to a point where you start thinking, how can I make my shared service add value to the whole group? How can I do something that the other group companies maybe don't yet know how to do, or maybe they do not have the time or the resources because they're working on their core businesses? How can I create services that will be adding value that nobody else in the group can add? And this is what I wanted to ask you about. One thing is this something that you, in your shared services, is this something that you are aiming for? Is this something that you would like to be for your groups? And then, of course, the other thing is, if this is something that you feel you would like to go towards, what are the steps that you have already done, or maybe the steps that you think you should be doing in the future to be able to achieve that? With this, I would like to invite everyone to share their audio and video, and I would like to ask who would like to be the first one to share their thoughts. Tom, we cannot hear you.
Just jump in again to say I see 6 more people on the screen, so please do join us, or if you want to just drop in some comments on the chat, I'll also read them out as well. But Radek, can we start with you with the DFTS, and particularly the Danish are, let's say, renowned for being very good on the process automation. Copenhagen has a lot of that expertise. Tell us a bit about what you see from the Danish perspective and your operations there in Poznan.
Sure, thanks, Tom. I think that, I agree everything that Andrzej was mentioning in terms of the complexities. When we look at the evolution of a center, I mean, the first stage is to stabilize the operations, make sure that we're delivering the operational results that are expected. Then you sort of look at the value add component of the tasks that we do. How can we drive the value sort of forward, adding sort of expertise and sort of going beyond the original mandate. And this is where I want to introduce another little concept, and that is when we look at automation, we tend to think of a static amount of variables that we have to base our decisions on. But what we found in practice is that the decision-making process in terms of do we automate or do we just basically, try to, push forward with, doing things quicker and more efficiently. What we found is that the decision-making process in terms of do we automate is not as simple as that. One of the complexities that we have at the moment is that we are in the middle of a new ERP process introduction. So we're going through and putting in a new ERP. So we've got this bit of a dilemma because there's a lot of processes that we've stabilized and harmonized, and we're saying, look, they are ripe for some sort of automations, RPA. We've been sort of doing a lot of things in-house, trying to sort of automate things. But in terms of carrying on and going beyond some of the basic things that we've done, what we found is that the introduction and the flexibility, the constant change in the business is actually introducing a lot of uncertainty because we've only got a very short period of time that we are certain of. Let's say a period of, let's say, 1, 2, maximum 3-year period. Anything beyond that, we're saying, look, on the balance of probabilities, things will change. So the whole decision-making process of RPA has been boiled down to, we need to make sure that the payback period is no longer than 2 years. If we cannot get a payback period for any automation within 2 years, we're going to say, look, it's a no-go because there's just too many uncertainties and we're just throwing money away because, for example, we're going to be changing the system, we're going to changing the RP, we're changing the process. And given that additional dynamic, what we found is that we struggled getting the justification to push forward with automations and RPAs because we just didn't have the certainty of the payback period in the required time frame that we're looking for.
Okay. Can I ask a question, Radek? Radek, specifically, can you give us 1 or 2, 3 examples of very specific processes that you may have been you applied process automation to that, and can you give us some sort of ROI return on? I mean, rather even if the process required X hours, how much of a scale improvement did you get from it?
That's a good question, Tom. And the answer is actually not that very simple because from a Danish perspective, a lot of the things that we automated was more to do with the quality element of that, rather than the pure mechanics of, let's say, efficiency gain. Doing something faster than before. I'll give you a very good case study. We've, as you know, several years ago, we've won this, sort of several awards for some of the automations that we've done to do with our debt management software that we've created in-house. The initial phases of that automation were very straightforward, right? There was a dunning process. There was some very mechanical elements that we've quantified and saying, look, manually, it's taking X amount of time. We can quickly automate that, and that's going to cut down our sort of processing time from, let's say, in some cases, even by 90%. These were very quick and easy efficiency gains that we're able to achieve at the initial phases of the project. But I would say, 2/3 of the further evolution of the projects, it wasn't so much about, doing things faster. It was about gaining additional transparency, additional functionality. It was about self-service, because, for example, with the automation program that we've had, all of a sudden, we've created a portal where, our business unit, partners could actually log into the software, look at the status of the given, let's say, debt follow-up process. There was a lot of additional functionality, transparency, quality elements that we've introduced. And it's actually very hard to quantify what is the ROI on that. So this is going back to what I said at the earlier stages. The initial phase of quantifying transactional, let's say, efficient gains, easy. But that was only 10% of our project. 90% of our project was to do with the quality, transparency, self-service capability, which wasn't there before. So we've added functionality that wasn't there before. So in fact, we've incurred additional cost. But the arguments we've used is that bore additional results that, from a longer term perspective, we can say, look, when we look at our, let's say, overall debt overdue, for example, DSO days, well, that has reduced. And we said the argument is, well, that is a direct result of the, let's say, the efficiency that we're gaining through things like this automations, the greater transparency, and so forth. So to cut the, let's say, to summarize quite a long argument, every case study, I think, needs to be assessed on its merits. And sometimes, there are no clear answers. You need to fall back on qualitative, judgmental, let's say, questions and arguments, and ultimately gain the necessary buyback from, from your, stakeholders.
But that's a really interesting question for me, because I see quite a lot of organizations actually going into this direction where at the beginning you're automating to get the efficiencies because you kind of need to build a business case and you need to get the people to sponsor whatever it is you're doing. But then at a certain point you start automating processes that add value somehow. So as you said, it may be quality, or maybe you start doing something that the people should have been doing, but they haven't because they never had the time. And Correct. Now you're automating it, and now it can happen. And we saw that with this test automation, actually, where we were, while building the bot, we were absolutely sure that they have been doing it. They wanted to do it weekly. We thought they have been doing it, but only monthly. After the automation has been introduced, and we've been talking about this, we saw that they haven't been doing it at all because they never had the time to do it. So on that front, the automation just basically allowed them to perform the things that they should have been doing. But then the question is, and I'm very eager to see how discussions on your side have been going on from that perspective. If you are unable to, because those things are really hard to quantify. It's really hard to say this is exactly the money that we saved because we put together this, and this automation. Do you have any advice on how to talk about those things? How do you start those discussions? How do you do that?
Look, that's a very good point, because when we talk about qualitative, let's say, benefits, you're absolutely spot on. It is very hard to quantify that. The key arguments that I fall back on when sort of presenting and justifying further, let's say, development in those areas, I sort of fall back on my auditing years, and that's the same argument with auditors. What's the cost of audit? And it's like, well, shit, it's a cost. You pay money for it. What benefit do you get out of it? Well, the benefit is that what's the cost of fraud, right? So it's the same. It's the same sort of argument that that sort of doing the auditing years that I've spent is that the process, the strength of the processes that you have, the quality embedded in the processes, it's not a direct, let's say, gain in terms of what you're getting out of it right then. It is the benefit of what it is preventing, right? So the cost of audit is, if you don't do it, you might incur, let's say, a cost of fraud. And bang, there's a $500,000 fraud or the $2 million fraud, bang, that's a one-off cost. By doing a proper audit, having good, strong systems, which you're incurring costs, but you're preventing something else. So that's exactly the same argument that I've used when presenting the further development of our debt management software. Yes, we are incurring additional costs, but the benefit is in this intangible quality that we can present. It's the intangible let's say, trust and competence that we've built with the rest of the organizations, that they can trust us to move forward and be the driver and be the master of the processes. This is sort of the little sort of the secret of how do you evolve, let's say, a shared service center from a transactional cost center to, let's say, a knowledge center, which is driving a given process and is being responsible for the decision making in terms of what technology do we choose, what direction do we move in, and being the true business partner in charge of the process. That's a very, very very intangible fine line, how to get from one to the other. And to me, this is exactly the same argument in that you use there to get there. It's the same arguments you use in order to quantify these intangible benefits of, let's say, this quality and improving service, those additional things that add value to the business. So your ability to push forward that is directly proportional to effectively the evolution, the trust, and the growth of the center from a pure transactional cost center doing basic transactional monotonous tasks to being a true master of the process and being the decision maker in the direction that process is evolving and what technologies it's using, what functionality it's using.
Yeah, I think that this is spot on, and this is something that goes into the direction of the shared service organization changing and evolving into something else. It's the shared services are no longer what they used to be 10 years ago, right? But while we're at it, if I may pick your brain a little bit more, because Roman on the introduction to the whole conference, he talked about how kind of RPA is no longer, I don't remember how he phrased it exactly, but it's no longer that big of a topic. That now it's machine learning and AI and all the advanced technologies. Is this your experience in your organization? Are you already playing with those, say, more advanced technologies, or are you not there yet? Because most organizations on the market still didn't do the groundwork on RPA and process automation to be able to get on the next level?
I mean, it's a good question. There's several dimensions related to that let's say phenomena or the problem that that we have. Let me put the answer this way. When we look at RPA, and I'm going to sort of fall back to a recent discussion I had with our HQ. RPA is a very good tool that we can use, but that's a tool that is meant to, let's say, add value to the process rather than be used as a sort of blanket fix-it-all. And it's I'm going to fall back to, let's say, a little acronym that we've used, in my sort of years past, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If we don't fix the underlying processes, the data within it, if we don't clean the data, I mean, I don't care how good the RPA or how good the automation is going to be, garbage in, garbage out. So RPA and automation in itself is just a tool in the decision making sort of process in terms of how do we run our organizations, what are the cost drivers, what are the revenue drivers, and therefore what are the critical pieces of information we as a business need to be looking at, and therefore what tools we want to automate in order to make sense out of that, what reporting functionality we want to have. So I look at it from that perspective. RPA for the sake of RPA, automation for the sake of automation, to me is meaningless. My question is, what is the business? What drives that business? And therefore, what information do I need to have in order to make right decisions for that business? And that's the thought process, and everything basically stems from that.
Maybe I will bring some additional arguments here because I used to work at Lufthansa, where I was responsible for setting up globally the automation teams for their shared service center a couple of years ago. And the scenario you mentioned, Andrzej, reminds me also some cases that we did there, and what was also mentioned by Radek, that it's not that easy to evaluate impact of what are the real benefits of automation. Just to give you a quick example, a few years ago, Indian government implemented VAT tax. This was a pretty new thing for Indian market, and basically the software providers which supports different airlines said, okay, we will be ready to implement this VAT in our systems in about 9 to 12 months. However, the tax was implemented like with 2 or 3 months period. So from one side, we could expect that probably the software providers might be a little late on their side, and we need to start issuing invoices with added VAT, which we are not totally prepared for, in 2 or 3 months. So for this short period of time, we used a mix of RPA tools and few others, just to allow the operations in India to keep selling the tickets for the flights. By the law, they won't be allowed to sell the tickets without the accounted VAT ID. So RPA tools gave shared service center a flexibility to save the income for the company. And this is also something that in some businesses it may not happen at all, but sometimes it will save your skin. So I guess that's why it's really hard to quantify what could be the benefits for the shared service center and for the organization. But to all the arguments that you mentioned, I would also add flexibility.
Yeah, and I think this is a very valid point, and I actually really like this sort of examples. I saw another on the market. I've been talking to a director from a big company where they have been introducing a new ERP system. And the plan was that they will introduce the new one, migrate the data, but for a year, they will have both the new one and the old one to make sure that kind of everything works. And this meant that whatever system you input your data into, you have to have some kind of a way to put the same data into the other system, so you keep them aligned, right? And it was too expensive to prepare like a proper data pipeline between those systems. So they actually built robots that were tirelessly retyping data from one system to another, but they knew it's only going to last a year. They knew that in 12 months, we shut this down and we're never going to use it again, hopefully. But it was still worth it, because otherwise they said they would have to have a team of 15 or 20 people doing nothing but typing stuff from one system to another. So in this case, you get the return on investment in terms of kind of, if we don't do this, this is the cost that we're going to have to take. So it is in a way more quantifiable, but this is something that ends in a year. The benefit that you have kind of stops. You count your pennies and you go on, and you no longer need that automation. When it comes to migrating data between systems, Tim, maybe you have some interesting stories because you work with organizations that deal with SAP, and we know that SAP migration is a big task. It's not something that is done overnight. Do you see companies using tools like Windshuttle or other automation tools to do that?
Yes, we do, particularly on the migration to S4HANA, definitely. One of the reasons why we get used is that we're a very, very safe way of what I would call democratizing tools right across the organization, instead of it all being in IT. But there's been a couple of things which are quite interesting that you've been talking about, that Radek mentioned as well. It's not just always about the cost reduction in the process. It's about what it delivers or prevents. And Radek made a good point about fraud. If you have a proper digitally transformed process where everyone's touch points are monitored, and then you have a whole bunch of approvals that have to go through, you can eliminate fraud on a grand scale. And in fact, some of the largest fraud cases have been no more than somebody with huge authority in an organization standing over someone and making them do what we know as a journal transaction. And if you digitally transform that process and have a number of touch points and a number of approvers, then you don't get the big guy being the bully, making someone make a fraud transaction. These are absolute classics in some of the world's largest fraud or false accounting cases. And one of the other things as well is actually, by digitally transforming the process and everyone involved, you make the process happen much faster. Now, we all could be involved in a process together today, and each of us has a task to do to make this process work. Now, today, we are doing it sequentially, i.e. I start it, I pass it to Dominic, he passes it to Radek, and he passes it to you. However, if you're smart and you digitally transform it and you automate it, you actually do everything in parallel. So, for instance, if it takes us all 5 minutes to do it, and we do it sequentially, it's taken us 20 minutes. If we do it in parallel, it's taken us 5. And that might sound a bit strange, but let me tell you how it works. If you take a product company, and there's no problem in mentioning this because it's out there. It's Coca-Cola, and what we know is that for them to build product data, and it's about the packaging and the content of the drink and everything else, it took them 56 days. When they digitally transformed it and had everyone doing the task in parallel, it took them 18 days. That's 38 days more revenue for that kind of drink, Coke, that brand.
Yeah.
That's colossal. But did anyone save any time in the tasks that they did? No. Is it? That's a really interesting outcome.
Yeah, this reminds me of actually, Dominic, you mentioned Lufthansa. I remember seeing somebody talking about automation of invoice issuing in Lufthansa, where I don't know the process itself. I know it was very complex. It was using 3 different systems. You had to pull the data together and transform it and calculate stuff and so on. And this process was taking, I think, 3 weeks to complete because there was always a backlog, and you had to wait to actually get the invoice. And after automation, it was something like 3 days. So it did do efficiencies, but most importantly, you issue the invoice faster, you get the money faster, your cash flow is better. This is the value that you get from some automations, right?
Yes. Actually, this was one of the POC project we did there, where the time savings were not very big, depending on the part of the month. It was from 0.5 to 1 FTE. But the customer satisfaction was much more important here for the
business outcome was much greater. Yeah, totally agree.
And it actually also, Tim, what you said about fraud is something that reminded me of a case, and I'm not going to name the company, but they almost, I mean, basically all the big companies get fraud attempts when it comes to incoming invoices, right? And you get people sending you fake invoices with a changed, the invoice looks the same, but there's a different bank account, and
bank account, yeah.
To try to get you to pay the money to a different bank account. And I remember a company that basically for certain vendors, you always have to get an approval if you're changing something, because if it's a big vendor, you pay big invoices, somebody needs to approve it. But if it's the people doing it, people can forget. And in this particular case, there was just a new person in the master data team, wasn't properly trained.
Yeah.
And so basically, they almost paid 38 million to a wrong account, which is quite a lot of money. And actually, it went through their master data, it went through their P2P, it went through their payment team, it went through their bank, but actually the receiving bank stopped it and called them and said, you know, there's an account set up 2 days ago and you want to put 38 million.
That doesn't look right.
Right? So this is the case where if you can automate such a process, if you do it right, the bot will not forget, the bot will not, be fresh, right? That is something that prevents you from doing this sort of stuff kind of forever.
Yeah, it's one of the commonest ones that we get involved in in master data, that if anyone touches a bank account, it has to trigger several approvals. It's very, and again, the system is smart enough to know that. It says, you can't do that. You know, my God, if we have to rely on the bank to return the money, we're in trouble, aren't we? Well, good Lord. But no, you're absolutely right. And there is so many different outcomes about digital transformation now. Yes, it makes processes faster, but it can also make a company function much faster as well. And that's really important. And another one again is again, no problem mentioning it. It's Coca-Cola again. What they've done is they've made their customer signing up truly digital now. So a guy goes into the shop and does everything he needs to do. So he takes the details of the shop. He even photographs the place in the shop where the refrigerator is going to go. And before he has left that shop, about 8 different processes have started seamlessly. Whereas before, he would note all this stuff down and he would put it all in when he got back to the office. So again, time to revenue. It means that this shop is now selling Coke faster than it would have done previously. But everyone in the process has still done the same job, but they've all done it in parallel and they've all done it faster.
Yeah. Yeah, but this sort of big time automation, it requires us to kind of take a step back and not to only automate little parts of whatever it is that we're doing.
Yes.
You need to look at the picture, and this takes time, and you need to have the right mindset to even start thinking about this, because that's not something that you start your automation journey with, right?
Absolutely. So when this guy leaves the shop and he presses send, all the data checks are done, all the credit checks are done, the refrigerator is ordered, everything just happens. And previously it was a sequential process that the guy would do when he got back behind his desk. He would say, oh, let me do the customer data, let me order the fridge. Not now, done. Complete with photographs of where to put it. So when the guy goes in with the fridge, he knows, he's seen the photograph, he's seen the electrical, socket, and he knows that's it.
What I want to add here is go back to what I want to do here is basically go back to your original question, Andrzej. How do you, in that case, present, let's say, the justification or the business case, for that type of automation? And I think, listening to everything we've said so far, and I think all of us have hit on that point, is that the onus of that argument making falls back very clearly on the, let's say, on the leaders of those shared service centers, the managers of those shared service centers, and therefore the requirement of the knowledge, the competence, the broad understanding of the business, and the closeness and partnership with the key decision makers in the business is actually very, very high. So the what is required on the management of such shared service centers is that they cannot afford to view themselves, I'm just doing my little process.
Yeah.
And they have to be wholeheartedly integrated into the business, understand not just the business, but really play that partnership role in adding value and saying, look, if I'm doing, if I'm having an IT process that I'm handling out of my shared service center, I'm going to be the master of that IT process and play that true business partner role to the business in understanding the business and how the process that I'm managing can add value to that. Same thing with finance, same thing with HR, same thing with everything else. The role of the managers and the heads is no longer just administering what is there. They're not administrators. It's managing and driving that process to add value to the business. And in order to make that level of arguments, what is required on the managers and the heads is a complete level of completely different, let's say, playing field to what has been happening in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one of the things that I mentioned in the roundtable that I did previously was a bit of controversial information from HFS, who were basically saying we don't need GBS and process people anymore. We just need digital. And that's not that and I did that to provoke people, because I know that's fundamentally not true. Because Radek, you've just pointed it out. You really have to understand all of the process and all of the details, and therefore how you're going to achieve the new outcome. So my point was to get everyone fired up, to make sure that they said, no, GBS is the place for this. So yeah.
Good stuff.
In a way, I would put it a little bit differently. If you do not take the ownership, if you do not start adding value, if you do not become center of excellence, not only for automation, but for basically for processes, then at a certain point you will no longer be needed, or your role will be reduced to the back office, right? If you want to be needed, if you want to be a proper part of your group, then you have to do all those things. It feels like it's no longer optional. I mean, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, you could think, do we do this or not? Maybe later. At this point in time, it feels like shared services no longer have that sort of a choice, because if they don't go this way, they will become in many ways irrelevant in the future, right?
But on the other hand here, I see a lot of shared service directors or leaders simply, they don't want to take this role. I mean, they feel comfortable with finance, with doing their P2P, O2C, R2R processes. And the big transformation for them is to take a new processes from procurement or HR, and then doing process automation for the rest of the group is like totally different area. It's so far from where they are currently that I'm wondering what could happen with such shared services in Central Europe. I mean, the one option would be the headquarter will say, okay, whatever. They can say it's time to change the head of shared service, or the third option could be maybe let's move everything to India or Philippines because it's cheaper than. And if you are only about cost arbitrage, then let's do the cost arbitrage further.
Yeah, and it's a very
performing the process without adding value to it, then anyone can do this, right? Then labor arbitrage is the way to decide where it should be done, right? So I completely agree.
Yeah, but picking up on your point, Dom, I meet a lot of leaders, and do you know what? I just think that those type of leaders are for yesterday. I think if you're going to successfully lead in the GBS world now, all the ones that are really what I would call switched on are what you would call digital and automation natives. You know, it's the first thing they think of. So I think, Dom, in my opinion, it's more of a change of the people, and that organization should probably change that center head. That's how I see it, because you do get older style ones that have just lived on the original labor arbitrage of moving stuff from Germany to Poland or wherever. That's gone now. So I think it's about the vision of the leader.
So as we're slowly getting to the end of the session, Radek, if I may ask you, what does it take to take on this challenge? Meaning, how is it that certain organizations do go into that direction and some others don't? Meaning, do you have any, I don't know, advice to other people that are maybe struggling with the decision on whether to take this on or how to take this on?
And let me suggest, first of all, Radek, that let Radek be the last word as we get to wrap this up in about 2 minutes. Okay.
Okay. I would say that, look, there's no silver bullet. There's no easy answers here. I think that for any organization willing to, sort of move in that direction and sort of pursuing the digital journey, we have to remember that digital journey in itself is not let's say, an end in itself. It's a means to an end. We have to understand the business. We have to understand the business drivers. And then as a center, be active part of that digital journey. If let's say the organizations and its leaders sit back and say, well, I'll just wait to be told what to do, that's not going to work. It's about direct engagement with the organization, understanding the business, and actively finding bespoke solutions that are suited to the business. Because I've been in several organizations, and every time we'll come up with a custom-made solution that works for the business.
Okay, I hope everybody takes that with them and try to use that for whatever it is they're doing. I would like to thank everyone for the discussion and for your thoughts. Thank you for that. Tom, anything from your side?
No, I think great. I think it's obviously a hot topic, and appreciate you guys, the conversation. There's a few people who didn't join us on the screen there, but I can see they're lurking in the background. Yes, that's fine. And we will wrap up this particular session. And just so you know, we have next hour, we've got